Good day, dear colleagues. I am Jose J. Pangay, the supervising psychologist of Lorma Medical Center, and I am very happy to be here in this learning session to share with you some tips, hacks, and insights that we can employ to combat some of the negative outcomes brought about by this 2 year of COVID-19 pandemic experience. So our learning session would basically revolve around two objectives, namely, to have an understanding of the psychological effects of this COVID-19 pandemic and to acquire and apply some tips on how we can navigate and thrive through this tough and uncertain times. So without much ado, let us formally begin this learning session by taking a look at the psychological effects of this pandemic from the bird's eye view. So currently, words such as unprecedented and uncertainty have become familiar and frequent terms in our daily language. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased uncertainty in seemingly all aspects of life, including physical health, mental health, finances, employment, education, not to mention relationships. But the question is, what is uncertainty? So, uncertainty basically means ambiguity. So this would also mean that we have to expend effort in trying to predict what will happen in addition to preparing to deal with all of the different outcomes. Moreover, uncertainty is not knowing what is going to happen. Now, when we combine uncertainty with threat, we get anxiety. Anxiety is an emotional response to a perceived threat that's not actually there in front of you, which means that anxiety is totally different from fear because fear is an emotional response to an actual or real threat. Contrary to what many people believe, anxiety and fear can both be adaptive because fear triggers our fight or flight response, which can save our lives. And that anxiety, on a moderate level, would increase our preparedness and vigilance. What I'm trying to say here is that anxiety is kind of an essential component of our lives. We have to have anxiety in a way. Otherwise, we would do things that are overly dangerous, rash, and irrational if we do not experience anxiety. So again, basically, anxiety is a basic part of our existence. On the flip side, not all people are capable of containing their anxiety levels. In fact, for some people, anxiety can be very overwhelming for them. Hence, people often experience the so-called combination of anxiety comorbid with stress. This makes things difficult for those people to navigate their feelings, emotions, and experiences. So for us to have a better and a more comprehensive and a more relatable context, let's try to go over the concrete experiences of people from all around the world and taking a look at the global documentation of the typical experiences in this time of COVID-19 pandemic. So from the global experience or global perspective, let's try to take a look at the combination of different studies. So here are some of the very common psychological effects of COVID-19 pandemic. We have the experience of anxiety, which validates what we have been mentioning earlier. We also have the effect of trauma and stress-related disorders. So this may just arise because of the experiences that we have because of social isolation. One other common psychological effect is the exacerbation of pre-existing mental health issues. So for people who already have existing mental health conditions, it has been exacerbated by the quarantine protocols and at the same time the different anxieties as well that would arise. Another common effect here would be sleep disturbances, and most especially the very sad thing is suicide ideation, attempt, and even a successful suicide death. We also have the existence of the COVID-19 anxiety phenomenon. This is also termed as coronaphobia and is a relatively emerging pandemic-related construct. And this is essentially the fear of acquiring COVID-19 pandemic. This COVID-19 anxiety is behaviorally manifested through the following symptoms. We have dizziness. We also have sleep disturbances because of the preoccupation of the thoughts about acquiring the virus. We can also see tonic mobility in this sense, appetite loss even, and the worst thing, nausea and abdominal stress. Now, typically, COVID-19 anxiety is caused by rumination, or basically the process of overthinking, wherein in the context of COVID-19 anxiety, there is the repetitive and passive focusing on COVID-19, which eventually leads to a person's impairment in solving simple or daily life problems. We also have the partner of COVID-19 anxiety, which is COVID-19 stress, which can be seen along 5 domains. So we can see COVID-19 stress along danger and contamination, wherein people have the fear of being in danger and being contaminated, or they feel stressed about the thought of having to face these potential consequences. We also have the stress pertaining to socioeconomic concerns, mainly about job loss, economic loss, loss of income, and the like. We also have xenophobia. This is basically a kind of fear pertaining to foreign objects, so foreign people, foreign parcels, even this is existent. We also have stress pertaining or relating to trauma and stress manifested through the different compulsive behavior such as frequent hand washing and the like. But of course, with the context of COVID-19, I think this compulsive behavior is not just considered to be an overreaction, but it is justified because it's better to be safe than to be sorry later on. Okay, so these are the global experiences. Let's try to proceed to the local experience here in the Philippines. So in a study conducted by Montano and Aceves last year, they found out that men and women do not significantly differ in terms of their psychological distress, which basically means that all individuals or all adults, regardless of sex, they experience the same type of psychological distress. And huge percentages from their sample have experienced moderate to severe levels of stress, anxiety, and even depression or feelings of depression. In another study conducted by the International Psychogeriatric Association, they found out as well other types of outcomes. So among older Filipino adults, depression and anxiety is very common. They also experience the unmet spiritual needs because again of the travel and gathering restrictions, they were not able to attend to their own churches for some spiritual gatherings. They also experience poor social well-being because again of the so-called physical and social distancing, wherein we were not allowed to interact physically with our friends because again of these quarantine restrictions. There is also the significant decline in physical well-being, mainly because of the disruption in terms of their physical routines. And another is the fear and eventual death alone, which is a very sad thing to happen, but indeed this is the very common outcome with respect now to a study conducted along older Filipino adults. So if we try to take a look at it in a nutshell, we can simply say that these experiences are completely normal and valid. As humans, we are hardwired to crave stability. Our brains don't like uncertainty. So it's perfectly natural for us to feel unsettled and anxious about the current events, specifically pertaining to this COVID-19 pandemic. It can be easy to get caught in a spiral of what ifs, worrying about our health, our family, our financial security, and how and when things will return to normal. But of course, we cannot lose hope because there are still ways on how we can combat this. So despite the fact that there's no way for us to turn off our anxiety neurons, no, we have to understand that there are still ways for us to manage the period of uncertainty and reduce the anxiety and stress for us to help ourselves to cope better. So with this, we are now transitioning to the second objective of this learning session, which is to gain an insight and of course to acquire the necessary tips that we can potentially apply in our own lives for us to get through these difficult times. So basically, I have prepared 10 practical tips that I would be pointing out that you may actually use in your lives. So without much ado, let's continue with our learning session. The first commandment, basically, that I would like to share with everyone is for us to change shift our paradigms in terms of how we take a look at things by taking actions over the things that we can control. Needless to say, there are certain tendencies for us people to focus on the things or focus on the problems that are way beyond our control. Take note, the COVID-19 is beyond our control. One thing that we can do though is to focus on our faculties and our abilities that we can use in order for us to live with this virus. So one thing that we can do is to take control over our routines. We can take control of our thoughts as well. That's possible. I will be sharing to you some tips later on how we can control our thoughts. But basically, the first action that we have to understand is that we need to recognize that we are capable of making or having control rather with some things. Like for example, our own selves and our own behaviors as well. So again, it's very important for us to bear in mind that we have to take action only over the things that we are in control of. The second one is for us not to dwell on any misfortune that we are acquiring or that we are having or that we are experiencing. I totally understand that in these difficult times, we have went through lots of downs. Some of us may have experienced quarantine and social isolation. So our dear colleagues may have experienced this. And sometimes there is a tendency wherein maybe in the first few months of this COVID-19 pandemic, and then some of you have acquired the virus or have contracted the virus, and that they felt like it's the end of the world for them. But of course, it's very important for us not to dwell on the misfortune because we have to remember this misfortune is not the end of our story. There is still something that can come after this misfortune. So again, if we try to marry this with what I was saying earlier about taking a perspective on the things that we can control of, these two would go together. So if we have acquired or we have contracted rather the virus, then one thing that we can do is to manage our symptoms, do isolation and the like for us not to pass on the virus to our family members and other loved ones. And with that, we can actually see silver linings in there. Okay? So the third one, which is what I was telling earlier about trying to control our thoughts, is that I would like you as well to learn the art of changing our narratives. So when we say change the narrative, this simply gives us the idea and principles on how we can take a look at better perspectives in these certain things or situations or experiences that we have. So allow me to share to you 3 practical ways on how we can actually change our narratives. The first one is to do the so-called benefit finding, wherein we have to take a look at the silver lining of all things. Okay, we have to take a look at the positive side of things. But of course, we have to be very wary of the so-called toxic positivity and benefit finding. Some people would say that no, you should not focus on the problem, you should only focus on what makes you happy, but of course that's also a negative way to go too. In order for us to find benefit in what we are doing, we have to acknowledge the presence, and at the same time we also have to acknowledge the problem. We have to acknowledge that it's there, but we have to take a look at the other positive outcomes that comes with it. Okay, so that's one. Again, benefit finding is a very practical way for us to change the narrative. The second one that we can do is the so-called thought disputation. For example, you have this negative thought, like most especially this may be applicable in the first few months of the quarantine before last year. No? And let's try to take a look. Like for example, you have the thought that when a person would contract the virus, this person would eventually die. That's a kind of an overly catastrophized thought that would automatically equate COVID-19 contraction with death. That's an irrational thought. Now, one thing that you can do is to dispute and challenge that thought. The question is, do all people, or ask yourself the question, do all people who contract the virus die? The answer is no. Because basically, if you try to take a look at this, although there is a principle for the rational emotive brief therapy which tells us that we have the ABCs of a behavior. So let's take a look at the example that I was pointing out earlier. With the thought of contracting the virus, which would eventually lead to death, that will give you the feeling of anxiety and restlessness. Okay, so that's the automatic emotional response with that kind of thought. Now let's try to change the thought. So by disputing the thought, so do you really think that people who contract the virus would automatically die? The answer is no. So with that, we are being led now to a different kind or different route towards another feeling or same feeling of restlessness and anxiety, but on a more reduced level, because somehow there is the reassurance that if you have contracted the virus, you will not automatically die. There are some potentialities which again would put you through the experience of fear and anxiety, but still the amount of anxiety would be lessened as compared to the emotional response with the original thought that was mentioned earlier. So again, that's how important thought disputation is. So again, those are the first two: benefit finding and to dispute your thought. The third one, which I don't know if this would work for everyone, but practically, the third one would simply tell us that whatever problem that you're going through, put yourself in a situation wherein a friend of yours would have that same problem and try to give an advice to this friend who would experience that problem. So in that sense, we can actually bank on the idea that, some people believe that we are very good in giving advices to people, but we are not good at giving advices towards ourselves. So we can actually use that to our advantage. So in that way, you can also possibly change the narrative that you have. So I hope these three ways on how to change narrative would work. If not, it's okay. You can still try to look for other ways on how you can reframe your thoughts. There are also other ways. There are other practical ways. It's just that I just mentioned three. So that might open other possibilities for us to have some conversations in the future. Another tip that I would like to share with everyone is the sense of gratefulness. Actively thinking of things that we are grateful for would also help us reframe our life principle and the way we view life in general. It can help add a little bit of perspective when we need it most. Like for example, this is still related to what I was mentioning earlier in changing the narrative. Whenever we find things that we are grateful for, it makes us appreciate what we have. This is not to invalidate or this is not necessarily to invalidate your experience or your negative experience, but just to give you a glimpse of how fortunate you are still, that you have jobs, you are still working while others are not. So this would again give us more inspiration and motivation to still continue on in this difficult time. Another that I would also like to share with everyone is for you to rest between battles. This is very important because whenever we divide tasks into small chunks and we take breaks between each to stretch, or walk or text a friend, we can allow our body to begin replenishing its resources. Although I understand that work in a medical center is kind of really tough, most especially if there's a surge of patients or clients. But only a matter of, let's say, 2 minutes to 5 minutes just for you to simply stress yourself would somehow quickly re-energize yourself from this. Okay. I'm not saying that you're going to use these breaks as an excuse for you to, or for us to procrastinate and the like, but what I'm saying is rest in between work is also very essential because we can drain our energy if we focus all of the time in the work without forgetting that we're also compromising ourselves, our own physical vessel, or our own physical body. So again, rest in between battles are highly encouraged as well. Another that I would also like to share with everyone is to practice mindfulness and self-care. Although with mindfulness, this is a bit of a phenomenon wherein we are encouraging people to be one with their own sense of self and to be one with their surroundings, which is why this would also help us develop our own consciousness and awareness. So you'd have to be very mindful of all the actions that you are doing, and at the same time being more considerate and more mindful about the people around you. There are multiple mindfulness exercises that I am very willing to share with everyone. So maybe I will try to coordinate with our training and development center to give some mindfulness exercise that we can all use. So I will prepare that, or I will prepare the compilation of these mindfulness exercises that can be shared with everyone. Another is the principle of self-care. This is one thing that we people, or we from the working population, always forget. We have the tendency to always work for the people that we love, always work for our clients without minding our own selves. We have to remember self-care is necessary. This is not a luxury, because this is important, again, related to what I mentioned earlier about resting in between battles. Because this will give us a way for us to re-energize and replenish our energies, for us to reach our optimal performance in our own respective lines of works. Although sometimes self-care is misinterpreted by some, most especially that they are saying that self-care is a one-shot activity. But no, you have to remember self-care is a lifetime process that we have to sustain. Self-care is not just simply taking a leave for a day or taking a leave for a week, because that's just a seasonal self-care. Self-care needs to be regular. So one thing that I can share with you is that whenever you have your time off, like for example at night when you are not on duty or you're not at your own work, spend bits of time for yourself, like to simply sleep. Although I don't know if you are all really sleeping very well right now with the different workloads that you all have, but it still pays for us to find time to really take care of ourselves. Another misconception about self-care is that they are often equating self-care to self-pampering. Remember, self-pampering is in no way a representation of self-care. Another thing that people would misattribute self-care to is for them to use self-care as an excuse to to avoid some things they would not like to do. Like for example, I'd rather go and eat to take care of myself because I'm tired, but that's just a way for us to avoid the current problem that we are experiencing or the current situation that we are in. So again, self-care has to be integrated in our own daily life routines. So I hope that we can get to have more talks and sessions with respect to this, because if we talk about, most especially with mindfulness is actually requiring us to have more time for more learning sessions for this. And I'm very much happy later on to organize or to simply share my insights, maybe in a recorded video as well, for us to have these mindfulness sessions as well. Okay, so that's for mindfulness and self-care. Another sharing that I would like to give to everyone is, try to explore other activities that's new to you. Because sometimes we get tired of our daily routine. We get tired of the same thing that goes around and comes around. So maybe we can try to do something new. This is not necessarily something to be very grand. This can be in very simple terms. Just, try to explore new things to give a new flavor to our own lives. And then again, this would be very helpful in adding perspective in our experiences. So let's also take a look at other ways for us to make some changes in our own experiences by taking a look at an external source of our energy, by trying to create positive connections with other people and socialize with the right people and then the right crowd. This is one thing that most especially that we Filipinos need. As we all know, coming from a very collectivistic orientation, we are well oriented and we are fully energized with the people around us. But sometimes we have also the tendency to surround ourselves with toxic people, toxic colleagues, and sometimes that also drains our energy. We even consider these people to be energy vampires, because they suck the life and energy out of you if they are this toxic crowd. So, one thing that you can do to take control of this is to create positive connections by choosing who to hang out with, or choosing the right people for you to spend some time with. Although it's totally understandable that we often spend time with people with respect to proximity or with respect to our units and the like, but sometimes, most especially if our own units are kind of not giving us the positive vibe, well, we still have to be very civil with one another. But what's more important here is that you have to build strong connections and positive connections with you, because this would serve as your strong social support. You need to, and everyone deserve to have friends who are genuinely caring for you. Not those friends who are simply there to celebrate your successes, but not to help you when you are in dire need or you're in desperate need of help. We have, I think most of us would have one or two experiences with respect to this kind of phenomenon. It's kind of tiring, really. And yeah, maybe you would ask, how can we spot whether a person is genuine to us? We can actually see that in the actions. Like for example, if you are, this is just a very prototypical way of trying to I determine the behavior, but this does not necessarily apply to all. For instance, when you are trying to tell a story to a person, you can spot if a person is marites or not. If a person, like for example, you are trying to share a story, and if this friend of you would ask the question, who immediately, then that's actually a red flag. They are more interested with the story, but they are not interested in how you felt with that particular situation. A genuine person would not be that interested about the person that you are talking about. They are more interested on your experience with respect to that particular event. So that's one way for you to spot those mariteses in our in our workplace. So that's one. Again, we have, and it's very important for us to create these positive connections. Another important thing that we can also do is to try to reconnect to people that we have lost connection with before. You know, it's important for us to do this, for us to sometimes rekindle some lost friendships, you know, or but not necessarily to reconnect to toxic relationships or to your ex-lovers and the like. No, please, no, that's a big no-no. So sometimes we leave friendships too long without communication and stay disconnected from the world. So maybe we can also find this avenue for us to do this by trying to send a short message to a friend or a family member. Although sometimes, I also have these experiences wherein there are some friends that I've been friends been for a while, but we lost connection, and then recently they're trying to contact me, but then again they have some favors to ask. I do not mind it, or I do not see any problem there, because maybe they're also trying to figure things out. But what matters most is not what they do to you, but what you do to them. Because again, as I have said earlier in our first sharing here, is that we can never control those things. What we can control then is how we react to this and how we really reconnect with other people. Okay, so that's one that we can do. Okay, and then next, most important, this would be the last commandment that I would like to share to everyone, is to find the courage to reach out. If you feel like you need it, be brave and get some support. Do not suffer in silence. Please get some help. At times, it's totally understandable that people have the fear of reaching out to people because they fear rejection or because they feel like people would judge them. And sometimes, some people would strongly believe that reaching out to some stranger is actually more helpful because there would be no holds barred. They can easily share things that they would like to share, mainly because there are no judgments. That's why we are here. Our office is available for some of your concerns. You can set some appointments for us to simply have some talks or some chats with respect now to the things that you are going through. So you can set an appointment with our office, and then we can sort things out, and then maybe I can help by merely listening to what you are going to share. Because at times, what we need the most in these difficult times are not just a massive kinds of help, but rather we just simply need a pair of genuine ears to listen to our own issues without judgment. So again, please be informed that we, our office, and at the same time the management as well, would be of full support should there be anything that you would need, most especially with respect to the fact, or basically with respect now to the process of how you are going to get through the psychological distresses that you are currently experiencing in these difficult times. So again, it's never a sign of weakness whenever we reach out to people. In fact, that is a sign of strength because you are very brave enough to reach out to people. And with this, I would like to end our brief learning session with this quote, that it is how we embrace the uncertainty in our lives that leads to the great transformation of our souls, by Brandon Trian. So this simply gives us the idea that whenever we accept the realities that we have, it's not an indication that we are surrendering, but rather we are accepting things because we cannot do anything about it, but rather just to live with it and embrace these uncertainties. Because in fact, one thing that's consistent in life are changes and uncertainties. So with that, thank you so much for taking some time to listen to this sharing from us. And I look forward to talking to you more about some things that you would like to talk about. So thank you so much, and I hope that we were able to give you some important tips in order for you to be able to combat these difficult times. God bless and keep safe, and please take care of your health.